So is there an atheist morality? Well, the short answer is yes and no. The long answer, well, that's what we're here for tonight. Except as I've been going into this one, I've discovered that the long answer is much longer than I can squeeze into the time we have here. So we're going to get a cut down version of the long answer. Now, my talk tonight was prompted by this book, The Moral Case Against Religious Belief. I think it's very important for everybody to listen to people and to read books from things that are contrary to their normal way of thinking, their normal belief system, so that we can be challenged in what we believe, so we can get a wide understanding of what is. According to the blurb on the back of this book, R.A. Sharp is Professor of Philosophy at the University of Wales, Lampeter. So he's obviously a man who knows how to think. He doesn't just make stuff up off the cuff, he's thought things through. And as a result, he doesn't go into the common things that atheists often throw at Christians or theists in the belief that these are slam dunk arguments, not realising that Christians have debunked those things numerous times in the past. He picks on things that are normally considered Christian strengths. He speaks specifically of Christianity because that's what he's aware of, but he kind of alludes to other religions as well. So just looking at the contents page, the various chapters: religion and morality, worship, faith and trust, love, sexual morality, immortality. And if you listen to those chapter titles, that sounds like it's a Christian living book. But this guy is an atheist, and he's taking these things and he is delving into them. And got some really worthwhile stuff in here, worth reading, and it's a real challenge. It's not easily debunked, unlike some of the other stuff. It's something to think about. My original plan was to do a critique of this book, but I eventually came to the conclusion that it was too difficult to try to get together his arguments in order to be able to express them properly, to be able to do this. So while it has influenced my thinking and planning for tonight, and while I can recommend it as a read if you want to do some thinking, I won't be dealing with it directly. The fact of the matter is that everyone has morality, a sense of and a belief in right and wrong, justice and injustice, good and evil, and a conscience that prompts, prods, convicts, condemns and guides. This is true for the Christian, for the Muslim, the atheist, the animist, the Hindu, for primitive tribespeople and university faculties, for children and politicians, for men and for women, for all of us. This is undeniable no matter what you consider to be the nature and origin of all this. Thus, no one, and I repeat, no one, is suggesting that atheists are not or cannot be moral, or good, or do right. It is essential to differentiate between atheism and people who call themselves atheists. And the question in this regard is whether or not those claiming atheism are being consistent with the worldview they claim to follow, or even if that is possible. Wrong. So what is morality? Some things are right, some things are wrong. But why should anything be considered right or wrong? What does it mean to say that something is right or that something is wrong? As a theist and as a Christian, I tend to define morality, right and wrong, along the lines of being and doing according to design. So if you consider a car, for example, a car is designed to have headlights and a windshield. You smash the headlights, knock out the windshield, and it is not being according to its design. You put the wrong fuel in the fuel tank, put diesel in a petrol car. You are not doing with it how it's designed to be dealt with. And so that is an evil in that sense. For humans, we were designed to have two arms. We were designed to have eyes that can see. So if you lose an arm, or if you are blind and you cannot see, then that is wrong. That is an evil. It is contrary to the design. But in saying that is an evil, we are not saying that the person is evil. We need to differentiate between being and doing. Morality only has to do with doing, not with being. So a blind person, for example, suffers from the evil that is his or her blindness. And this is an issue that Jesus himself dealt with at one stage, when people in his time thought that if someone was blind, it was a result of their sin or their parents' sin or something like that. And Jesus is saying, no, there's nothing intrinsically morally wrong with being blind, even though blindness itself is wrong. Similarly, you can be born a kleptomaniac and live all your life as a kleptomaniac. There is nothing morally wrong with that, even though it is not a good state of being. It is only when you actually go out and steal something that that act becomes morally wrong. According to the All About Philosophy website, morality speaks of a system of behaviour in regards to standards of right or wrong behaviour. The word carries the concepts of 1, moral standards with regard to behaviour, and 2, moral responsibility referring to our conscience, 3, a moral identity or one who is capable of right or wrong action, and common synonyms include ethics, principles, virtue and goodness. Similarly, that fount of all knowledge, Wikipedia, says that morality is the differentiation of intentions, decisions and actions between those that are distinguished as proper and those that are improper. Morality can be a body of standards or principles derived from a code of conduct, from a particular philosophy, religion or culture, or it can derive from a standard that a person believes should be universal. Morality may also be specifically synonymous with goodness or rightness. But is there in actual fact a real objective morality? Something that exists independent of us, or independent of the universe even. Something that we just instinctively know. Well, who has never cried, "That's not fair," or at least thought it and believed it? That's not fair is a concept that most of us feel and experience at a very early age, and then repeatedly through life. Injustice is something that most of us are acutely aware of. We intuitively and subconsciously believe in morality, in right and wrong. So, coming then to atheism. In true atheism, there is no such thing as morality, as right and wrong, as good and evil. Only what is. That is the sum total of what can be said. What is. In fact, Richard Dawkins said, "In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." Now, since this physical universe, time, space, mass energy, physical laws, is everything, there can be no spiritual or divine plane or supernatural. Then only that which has a naturalistic explanation can have any basis in reality. So from the point of view of naturalism, this physical universe, or multiverse if you prefer, is all there is. Morality cannot exist. There is no physical or chemical basis for it. Morality is purely a human invention with no underlying basis. Now, there are some atheists who will deny the actual existence of any of these things, as they are totally inconsistent with their understanding of atheism. Where do atheists get your morals? From cheese. What's that supposed to mean? I got tired of answering the question, so I decided to say cheese from now on. Well, aren't you worried that people won't take you seriously with an answer like that? Not at all. In fact, it's more rational than saying morals come from God. How do you figure? Well, for starters, I can prove cheese. And for those of you who come here regularly, you will know we often even have cheese for our break in the middle, so we can prove cheese. But if you look at this carefully, what he's saying is that there is no rational explanation for morals. According to Luke Muehlhauser, he wrote this article on the internet. During the Q&A following my talk at UCSD, a young Christian woman asked, "Without God, how can you have morality?" Just like the pig was asked, the atheist pig. The mostly sceptical audience laughed, as if it was a stupid question. Geez, not that again. Well, it's not a stupid question. It is a very good, important, difficult question. I reminded the audience that many atheistic philosophers agree with the assumption of her question. They agree that without God, there are no objective moral facts. In fact, 1/3 of philosophers think that there are no objective moral facts. That's no laughing matter. I went on to say that most philosophers, of course, don't think that adding a cosmic dictator to reality gets you objective moral facts. Divine command theory, because it grounds moral facts in the attitudes of a person, is, by definition, a subjective moral theory, not an objective one. And I'm not going to be critiquing his article, I'm just reading it tonight. But let's get back to this question of how the atheist can justify his belief in objective moral facts. Many atheists seem to think that moral realism is obvious and easy to prove. I disagree. Consider the claim we moral realists are making. We generally claim there are invisible properties in the world not detectable by our usual tools of science, properties of an entirely different sort than the is facts of science. These are mysterious ought facts, such as you ought to do this or ought not to do that. And there is great disagreement about what they are or how we know them. Now, that is a strong claim. An extraordinary claim, we might say. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So what is the atheist's extraordinary evidence for this claim? Usually it's something like this. I experience a world of moral facts. I feel very strongly that rape is objectively wrong and charity is objectively right. Almost everybody believes that in moral facts. It's just obvious. Until you can prove there aren't any, I'm justified in believing what people have always believed, that some things are really right or wrong. Do those arguments look familiar? They should. They are the exact same arguments atheists reject when they are given for the existence of God. Consider, I experience God. I feel very strongly that he exists. I feel his presence, and I know that I know that I know that he exists. Almost everybody believes in some kind of God. It's just obvious. Until you can prove that God doesn't exist, I'm justified in believing what people have always believed, that there is some kind of higher power. Atheists are sceptical of these arguments when given for the existence of God, but they are credulous and gullible toward these arguments when you replace the word God with another mysterious thing called moral facts. Like I said, many atheists do not believe in moral facts. But to those who do believe in objective moral facts, I must say, that's a pretty extraordinary claim. Please show me your extraordinary evidence. But of course, I am an atheist and a moral realist, so I must think there is good argument and evidence in favour of objective moral facts. But I do not defend moral realism by appealing to my moral experience or popular consensus. So in other words, he believes in objective moral facts, and he believes that there therefore must be a really good explanation for it, but he does not have that explanation. According to The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, the sole purpose of life is to propagate and perpetuate genes. Thus, morality was created by evolution to aid that. Now, overlooking the obviously big holes in that whole concept, why should we, or our genes care whether or not our genes go on, or the sun explodes, or the universe embraces heat death, or anything. It implies an underlying morality to start with, and this is thus circular and meaningless. To the atheist, belief in God is merely a byproduct. Morality does exist, however we define it. We all do have a concept of right and wrong, of good and evil, justice and injustice, fair and unfair. And as mentioned, in a purely naturalistic, non-theistic universe, there is no basis for that. Nothing at all to give rise to it, and no absolute basis by which any magically appearing morality could claim to be right or true, leaving it all to be subjective and relative, and thus meaningless. To the atheist, belief in God is merely a byproduct of brain chemistry, something that was selected for by evolution, because in primitive times it gave a survival or a competitive advantage. Now that still tells us nothing at all about how belief in a God came to be in the first place. In our modern developed times, so they say, it is now a disadvantage and needs to be suppressed. But is evolution also similarly a product of brain chemistry? Can chemical reactions really provide a basis for absolute truth? And if so, how could we know? Similarly, morality is merely the product of chemical reactions in the brain. It provided a survival advantage and so was selected for, but has no intrinsic or objective reality. Morality, belief in right and wrong, good and evil, is merely a chemically induced illusion. Another book that I found very useful doesn't look very exciting from the front cover and looks quite thick and bulky. It's entitled The Book That Made Your World by Vishal Mangalwadi. Now, Vishal is an Indian who grew up in India, immersed in Hindu and to a lesser extent Muslim and Buddhist thought and culture. And so his outlook on life, the universe and everything, and on history and humanity is very different from our Eurocentric perspective. And I have found this book extremely interesting and extremely worthwhile. And I just want to read a couple of excerpts from it tonight. So, first one. Secular humanism rejects the biblical worldview of a personal, rational, meaningful universe, with good triumphing over evil, providing the hope of redemption. Jean-Paul Sartre, from 1905 to 1980, masterfully expressed the atheistic existential wasteland in Nausea in 1938. In Sartre's world, every aspect of human existence is ludicrous. Even the torturous rape and murder of a young girl is trivialised as just one more meaningless event in an empty universe. Sartre's solution to this dilemma is to escape our absurd existence by creating something, in this case a jazz recording, that exists independent of ourselves. In The Stranger, Albert Camus similarly explores the bumbling life of a degenerate who, for no apparent reason whatsoever, murders a stranger on an Algerian beach. While a well-wrought piece of literature, it provides no basis for the moral reforms that Camus sought. It may resonate with people dragged into depression by their belief in the meaninglessness of life, yet it provides no impetus for them to lift themselves back out of their existential angst and make their world better. 74. During the 20th century, American culture was shaped by the Bible. Therefore, it escaped the consequences of this dehumanising secular myth. But as we noted in the first chapter, the postmodern West has moved close to the Buddha's denial of the soul's existence. Its practical consequences were expressed by a young grunge rocker who wrote, "I belong to the blank generation. I have no beliefs. I belong to no community, tradition, or anything like that. I am lost in this vast, vast world. I belong nowhere. I have absolutely no identity." Kurt Cobain was the logical product of this nihilism. If man is not made in God's image, a person cannot be anything special. Humanism is arrogance. Animalism is a truer philosophy. As Ingrid Newkirk, co-founder of the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, put it, a rat is a pig, is a dog, is a boy. In other words, Sheila's parents were right. A baby is not innately better and should have no higher privileges than an unwanted dog, pig, or rat. We are nothing special. Morality is neither here nor there. Now, most atheists are not true atheists at all, but rather anti-theists, or more specifically in general, anti-Christians. And in many cases, we must admit, they have good reason for that. Many have suffered at the hands of people calling themselves Christians, or of institutions calling themselves the Christian Church. But in calling these things wrong or evil, we are making moral judgments. We are assuming the existence of a real moral standard that makes things fundamentally wrong, and not just an expression of one person's taste, like broccoli is delicious or broccoli tastes horrible. However, I need to say to such people that it is necessary to dissociate your genuine subjective experiences from objective truth. For example, just because your science teacher at school was an evil brute who treated you unfairly does not mean that atoms are not real. Now, unlike atheism, anti-theism can have genuine morality. Whether we agree with the morality or not is another matter, but it can exist. For example, Richard Dawkins taught that teaching religion, or more specifically Christianity, to children is child abuse. And of course, that automatically presupposes that child abuse is morally wrong. So it all goes together in there. Another book I want to quote from tonight is this one, and the authors, Philip Johnson was a professor of law, and John Reynolds, a professor of philosophy. So once again, these are men who know how to think. And another worthwhile book. Wired is a magazine for technophiles, typically crammed with articles and advertisements touting the latest in electronic gadgetry. The November 2006 issue, however, was mostly devoted to a long and provocative article by Gary Wolfe about the resurgent scientific atheism, described by Time, its introduction to the Dawkins-Collins debate. Some scientists, no longer content to defend their territory from outside interference, have decided that belief in God is an evil, no longer to be tolerated. Much of their indignation is directed at acts of Islamic terrorism, but they cast the aim broadly at religion and thus condemn Christians as similarly misguided. Now, the target of this verbal jihad is not so much religious fundamentalists as liberal or moderate Christians, whom they accuse of providing respectable cover for the fundamentalists, or even lukewarm agnostics like Gary Wolfe, who shirk their duty to engage in the battle on the side of atheism. These latter are firmly told that neutrality in the war against God is not an option. Or as Wolfe puts it, we are called out, we fence-sitters, and told to help exorcise this debilitating curse, the curse of faith. The new atheists will not let us off the hook simply because we are not doctrinaire believers. They condemn not just belief in God, but respect for belief in God. Religion is not only wrong, it is evil. And every couple of pages, page 20. Right. Despite poll figures that show that only a tiny fraction of Americans are atheist, Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris are optimistic about their chances for eventual political success. Dawkins estimates that there are a great many silent atheists in America, whose existence is overlooked by the public opinion polls. but who will join the atheist campaign when enough others have taken a public stand. Dawkins thinks that atheists today are in much the same position as gays were a generation ago, before gay liberation movements rallied public and judicial support. Harris likes to muse about how public opinion has turned around in the past on other issues, such as slavery. At some point, Harris writes, clinging to a belief in God will become too embarrassing to continue. At that time, atheism will be the dominant religious position in America and the world. As Christopher Hitchens actually said, I am not even an atheist so much as I am an anti-theist. Now, morality depends on rationality. Where we have absolutes, we have rationality. We can say that A and B implies C. We have logic and reason. We can come to definite conclusions. We can decide definitively that something is right or something is wrong. Truth has concrete existence and is always applicable. But, I don't know if you've noticed this one, we live in a post-truth culture. Postmodernism is so last century. Truth is of secondary importance and is only relevant if and when it lines up with our current program. And even then it remains a second-class citizen. Just taking these two quotes here. The first one by Dr. Kevin Donnelly, the co-chair of the 2014 Australian Curriculum Review, where he writes, what is known as the new sociology of education basically argues that mathematics, physics, science, they're all social constructs. They have no inherent meaning or value. And Charles Colson talks about a widespread secularisation increasingly descends into a moral, intellectual and spiritual nihilism that denies not only the one who is the truth, but the very idea of truth itself. Yeah, wasn't sure if I'd have time for this, but there's another article here that I'll try and get some out of. This was an article written in January 2003, January the 3rd, 2019, January of this year, entitled, Comparing Manus to Auschwitz Corrupts the Truth. It's not Auschwitz, no matter how much you say it is. In the small village in Italy's north, where my family comes from, there's a barn wall covered in bullet holes, just across the cobbled street from the main bar. The only bar actually in this bustling metropolis of 350 people, perched on the side of a mountain in the Valtellina region. The bullet holes cover faded, barely legible fascist graffiti, written sometime during Mussolini's reign. It said, only God can crush the fascist will. Mankind and circumstances never. It's a typically modest fascist assertion, no doubt written to remind villagers what was what. The bullets came after the end of World War II, when in a solid dose of pragmatism, local partigiani, or resistance fighters, showed their feelings by machine gunning the graffiti. Their decision to shoot it up rather than knock it down has left an important and instructive historical testament. Back in the village last year, I traced my fingers again along that cold stone, feeling the bullet holes, reading the faded script, remembering the stories that bear testimony to the facts of history. Facts that are fast becoming a casualty of a different kind of war. A war being waged in the trenches of modern identity-driven politics. This past week, a skirmish took place that revealed a special kind of ignorance. The simplest precis is this. A prominent priest and social justice advocate said that the faces of illegal immigrants in detention on Manus Island reminded him of the faces of those condemned to be executed in the Nazi death camp of Auschwitz. I'm not going to name him. This isn't about slinging mud at a good man for a shockingly mistaken view. Nobody needs more of that. What we do need more of is the intellectual bravery to defend the truth. More facts, less feel-pinions, and very definitely more truth in our political discourse. I guess that's the reason I shared with you the story about that wall in my family village. It's proof that there's no room for opinion when the facts are known. In that case, the testament to those facts scream from bullet holes in an old stone wall and from truth recounted through generations. Those bullet holes don't care about feelings. They testify to fact. It doesn't matter how much anyone says Manus Island is like Auschwitz or any other death camp. It isn't, and no amount of opinions formed on ignorance of the past and a convenient disdain for present-day truth will change that. Why should we care? Just another social media storm. I hear you, but I reckon we must care, and here's why. In case you've not been paying attention, facts are under siege. Little like concrete cancer, it started quietly and in isolated pockets, and it was kind of easy to dismiss as fringe-dwelling eccentricity. Not anymore. With perplexing alacrity, the woke brigade are extending their disdain for science to history. And it matters because these views, these conversations, are at a political level, feeding into how policy is formed. While there are arguably fewer exciting words on the planet, policy development matters, because ultimately it governs how we live, how our tax dollars are spent, and how much government gets to impede on our individual choices in day-to-day life. Each of us should care that it not be formed by those who are strong on emotion and offence, but not much else. Sound policy should always be empathetic, but not emotional. It should be birthed by reasoned debate, because the ability to reason is the bedrock of sound, dispassionate decision-making that carries us all forward. What I'm talking about isn't just in Australia, and it isn't just fools comparing strong border control with a Nazi death camp, the horrors of which are well documented. It isn't just about a school in the UK telling 8-year-olds that boys can get their period, because menstruation needs to be inclusive. It is about the fact that sound policy development is everyone's business. More broadly, it is the tendency by some to sacrifice facts for emotion, and the absence of anyone in leadership to stand up and say enough. By all means, be against offshore processing, but don't go the full moron and say that the policy is the seed that will result in the systematic eradication of 6 million people. Just as the law should be reason free from passion, conversations about the big issues must also be reasoned, but moreover free from dishonest revisionism, masquerading as some kind of social enlightenment. When in a recent column, I pointed out that boys, biologically, can't get a period, and that shouldn't be offensive because it's just a statement of scientific fact. I was told to get with the times. No problem, she writes, just as soon as the fundamental biology of the human race changes, I'm on board. Consider the rise and rise of political correctness. It is truth that is defined by the ruling class to be true, irrespective of the facts. If it was truth, real truth, that we considered central, political correctness would not enter into it. Something is either true and right, or it is false and wrong. But political correctness means that whatever those in charge want, that is what is correct. And when I say in charge and ruling class, those terms do not necessarily mean those in government, just those who are pulling the strings. Yeah. Coming back to this book again, another quote, page 77. This is from the chapter entitled Rationality. Edward Grant pointed out in God and Reason in the Middle Ages that during the later Middle Ages, from roughly AD 1050 to 1500, the Bible created a peculiar religious person called the schoolman or scholastic. He used logic as his primary tool to study divinity. No earlier culture had created such a rational man with the intellectual capacity for establishing the foundations of the nation-state, parliaments, democracy, commerce, banking, higher education, and various literary forms such as novels and history. The scientific, technological, military and economic success of the West came from the fact that it became a thinking civilization. Was its rationality a coincidence of history? Or did the Bible promote rationality because it informed the West that the ultimate reality behind the universe was the rational word of a personal God? It was not, as Indian sages thought, primeval silence, senseless sound, energy, or impersonal consciousness. Many in the West followed atheists like Haldeman Julius in rejecting belief in a rational creator. It did not occur to them that rejecting the Bible's God might undermine the West's confidence in reason, that it might force their universities to conclude that rationality could not be intrinsic to the universe, that atheism would make reason a chance product of blind chemistry, that logic would become an accidental and dispensable product of Western culture, losing its authority to subject all viewpoints and all cultures to its rules. Professor Alan Bloom's thesis regarding the closing of the American mind to things such as truth, things that really matter, is important. He laments the West's loss of confidence and in its own intellectual heritage of great books. This confidence was born during the Middle Ages. Following Augustine and John of Damascus, Christians studied the Bible and other great books because they believed that the Creator himself had communicated his thoughts in a book and fashioned the human mind in his own image. God gave the gift of reason to all human beings so that we might love him, know all truth, and understand and manage his creation. Devout Christians cultivated their minds by copying, preserving, and studying great books because they believed that to be godlike meant to develop the intellect, to grow in our knowledge of all truth, whether individual or culture, whichever individual or culture discovers it first. That is what made the West a thinking civilization. Amputation of its soul cannot but lead to the closing of the American mind. While Alan Bloom lamented the icons of mindless music, such as Mick Jagger, the most unabashed promoter of anti-intellectualism came to America from India, Osho Rajneesh. He was one of the first public intellectuals to take postmodern thought from the ivory tower to the middle class. He promoted Cobain's nihilism and the Buddhist idea that words had nothing to do with truth, that the ultimate reality was silence, shunyata, void, or nothingness. So, what is more important? Truth or saving face? Truth or feeling good about yourself? Truth or temporary happiness? If eternal destiny is involved, then truth is more important than any possible temporary discomfort. It is, in fact, essential. But if this brief existence is all there is, then anything that makes it more palatable is to be preferred. Concepts such as truth are not particularly relevant and should only be invoked where they help with temporary happiness. So then, coming back to anti-theistic morality. What is this morality? Where does it come from? How did it come to be? What is its foundation? Secular humanism is built on atheism and provides the framework for anti-theism. I just have a little video here from Humanist Society that I'd like to play, and we'll hope it works this time. So if you listen carefully to that video, it is self-contradictory and circular, and it actually provides no explanatory value whatsoever. It sounds good, but it doesn't really tell us anything about where morality came from, just that, again, morality is a human invention with no real basis. And that's what these images display as well. Morality in this context is all a human invention. There is no underlying foundation. And this means that morality is subjective and relative. One person's opinion is as good as anyone else's. And just a few quotes by some atheists. Bertrand Russell wrote, "It follows from the fact that the existent world is of such and such a nature, nothing can be inferred as to what things are good or bad." Or in other words, he acknowledges not morality, but says the universe gives us no basis for it. I have no difficulty in practical moral judgments, which I find I make on a roughly hedonistic, i.e. utilitarian basis. But when it comes to the philosophy of moral judgments, I am impelled in two opposite directions and remain perplexed. So, as an atheist, Bertrand Russell says, I am a moral person. I do see things as right and wrong. I have morality, but I've got no idea where it comes from. Or a random comment by somebody named Paul that I found online. He says, I'm okay with folk being religious and believing in God and all that fairy tale BS. However, I just wish they would shut up and keep it to themselves and lead the rest of us to live happy, guilt-free lives. And if you read behind the lines of what he's saying there, he is implying that morality comes from religion and from believing in God. Now, those of you who have heard me speak before will know that I have great difficulty preparing a talk like this without somewhere including a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. So here's one for tonight. So it's January, Calvin and Hobbes are out for a walk. How are you doing on your New Year's resolutions, Hobbes asks. I didn't make any, says Calvin. See, in order to improve oneself, one must have some idea of what's good. That implies certain values. But as we all know, values are relative. Every system of belief is equally valid, and we need to tolerate diversity. Virtue isn't better than vice, it's just different. To which Hobbes replies, I don't know if I can tolerate that much tolerance. And Calvin says, I refuse to be victimised by notions of virtuous behaviour. Two tonight, double or nothing. Again, Calvin and Hobbes are out walking in the woods, and Calvin kind of starts off talking to Hobbes. I don't believe in ethics anymore. As far as I'm concerned, the ends justify the means. Get what you can while the getting's good. That's what I say. Might makes right. The winners write the history books. It's a dog-eat-dog world. So I'll do whatever I have to and let others argue about whether it's right or not. And then Hobbes shoves Calvin into the mud. Why do you do that? You're in my way, says Hobbes. Now you're not. The ends justify the means. I didn't mean for everyone, you dolt. Just me. And I have another article I found on the internet. I actually found lots of stuff which I'd have loved to use tonight, but there's a limit. This one, why there is no such thing as a good atheist. You clicked on this post for one of two reasons. Either you're hoping that I'm right, or you know that I'm wrong. For those of you who are eager to pierce me with your wit and crush my pre-modern mind, allow me to issue a challenge. I contend that any response you make will only prove my case. Like encountering a hustler on the streets of Vegas, the deck is stacked and the odds are not in your favour. Before our love fest continues, allow me to define an important term, worldview. A worldview is your view of everything inside and possibly outside the universe. Truth, religion, beauty, war, morality, Nickelback, everything. Everybody has one. While it is true that there is no definitive atheistic worldview, all atheists share the same fundamental beliefs as the core to their personal worldviews. While some want to state that atheism is simply a disbelief in the existence of a God, there really is more to it. Every expression of atheism necessitates at least three additional affirmations. 1, the universe is purely material. It is strictly natural and there is no such thing as the supernatural, e.g. gods or spiritual forces. 2, the universe is scientific. It is observable, knowable, and governed strictly by the laws of physics. 3, the universe is impersonal. It does not have a consciousness or a will, nor is it guided by a consciousness or a will. Denial of any one of those three affirmations will strike a mortal blow to atheism. Anything and everything that happens in such a universe is meaningless. A tree falls. A young girl is rescued from sexual slavery. A dog barks. A man is killed for not espousing the national religion. These are all actions that can be known and explained, but never given any meaning or value. A good atheist, that is, a consistent atheist, recognises this dilemma. His only reasonable conclusion is to reject objective meaning and morality. Thus, calling him good in the moral sense is nonsensical. There is no morally good atheist because there is no objective morality. At best, morality is the mass delusion shared by humanity, protecting us from the cold sting of despair. For those of you who think you're about to light up the supposed straw man and raise me to the ground, consider the following quotes. According to William Provine, modern science directly implies that there is no ultimate meaning for humans. Or Richard Dawkins, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Or Edward O. Wilson says, no species, ours included, possesses a purpose beyond the imperatives created by its genetic history. Based on the non-negotiable premises of atheism, these are the only logical conclusions. But I've never met an atheist who managed to live this way. All the atheists I've known personally, and from afar, live as if there is objective meaning and morality. How is this explained? In a Hail Mary-like attempt to reconcile the inescapability of objective morality and the assurances of atheism, two possible answers are launched. Answer number one, morality is the result of socio-biological evolution. This is a two-pronged attempt at justifying moral claims. First, a sense of morality evolved to ensure human survival. Much like an eye or a tooth, it is necessary for the human race to continue. If this were true, for any claim to be moral, it would have to serve the practical purpose of advancing the human race. So, compassion for the dying would be immoral. Killing mentally handicapped children would be moral. And perhaps the most moral action would be men raping many women and forcing them to birth more children. Morality in this view can only mean those actions that are helpful to make more fit humans. It does nothing to help us grapple with the truth that it's always wrong to torture diseased children or rape women. Second, morality was developed to ensure the success of societies, which are necessary for human survival and thriving. Like the rules of a board game, it is contrived to bring us together for productivity and happiness. If this were true, there is nothing to which we can appeal when we find the behaviour of other societies repugnant and reprehensible. Because morality is the construct of a social group. It cannot extend further than a society's borders or endure longer than a society's existence. Furthermore, within our own society, the most immoral are not merely the ones who transgress our code, but the ones who tend to change it. And before I read the next bit, just mention this article was written in 2014, so it's slightly behind the times here. This would make those fighting for marriage equality the most immoral. That is, until they become the majority and institute change. I suppose that then they become moral and traditionalists become immoral. But it's the mathematics that determines rightness or wrongness of a side, not the content of any belief or argument. So this view of morality does nothing to provide a reasonable answer for why it would be objectively wrong to torture diseased children, rape women, or kill those who don't affirm a national religion. It only provides a motivation for continuing the delusion of objective morality. The second possible answer is that morality is logical. Atheists who take this route start in a position of checkmate without realising it. First, the temptation is to pervert this conversation into a debate about whether atheists can be moral. Of course they can. That is not the question. The question is how we make sense of moral claims if we play by the rules that atheism demands. Morality may be logical, but logic does not equate to morality. The only way to make a logical moral argument is to presuppose morality and meaning to start with. Try making a logical argument that slavery is wrong without presupposing morality. It is impossible. All logical arguments for morality assume that human thriving, happiness and dignity are superior to contrary views. The strict framework of atheism does not allow for those starting points. So any person arguing for one or two would not be a good atheist. That is, he lives in contradiction to the mandates of his worldview. And there's more to that article, but I'll leave it there. So, in conclusion tonight, yes, atheists are moral creatures. They believe that some things are fundamentally right and some are fundamentally wrong. Some atheists live lives that put many theists to shame. But no, there is no atheist morality. In a true non-theistic universe, morality cannot exist. What is the sum total of what can be said. One human torturing and murdering another is no more right or wrong than a black hole ripping apart and swallowing a star. Thus, we find that those calling themselves atheists find it utterly impossible to live consistently with what they claim to believe. Hence, my original answer to this question, yes and no. I've included a bibliography in this tonight, so this is the 3 books that I have used. They're all well worth reading, one by an atheist, the others 2 by Christians, plus some of the websites that I've used and looked up. Again, some of these are atheist sites, some Christian sites, some just general anything sites. These have contributed to my talk tonight, and there is plenty more as well besides those.
Probably a bit controversial. So I'll leave it open to other people who would like to ask questions now or make comments. Otherwise, I could be controversial.
Listening to it, I must admit, I thought I knew, I think I know what morality is, but truth wasn't defined. And it seemed like we were arguing about, or the argument was from the perspective of truth and equating that to morality. So I didn't get the thread between those 2 things, or what the point was of what is the difference between truth and morality.
I think the point there was that morality depends upon truth. If we do not have truth, then there's no way of saying anything is right or wrong.
Okay, so what is truth? Oh, that's the question.
That's a good question.
No.
Because
You define morality, but you didn't define truth. So truth to me is relative. And I'll use that word deliberately, I don't know if you... Because truth to a Christian is that Jesus rose from the dead. But you can't prove it, so it's not necessarily the truth.
Oh, yeah, I would say it has to be positively either true or false. Yeah. And that the truth...
So that's not the true thing. But in a Christian's perspective, it may be. So that's why I'm asking, what is truth and what is
no, I disagree with you on that. Like, truth is not what you want to believe, it's things as they really are. Like, in objective reality, either Christ rose from the dead or he didn't.
So that's not truth then, is it? That's objective reality. You're defining that as objective reality then rather than truth.
Yeah. Well, the truth is things that they really are.
Yeah, truth is a correspondence to reality.
Yeah.
But you can't prove that
that doesn't matter.
That's different.
Oh.
Whatever you might happen to believe, there's still the assumption that something is true and something is false. You may be wrong in your belief, but there is still a truth that is fundamentally true.
Yeah, so I'm saying that that's not a truth.
Why?
That drives... The truth is that an apple will fall to the ground.
Yeah.
But you can't prove that Christ rose from the dead.
Well, it would, in a sense. You may not be able to prove whether something's true or not, but it still has a truth. It still has a truth value, even though you may not know it.
I'm being controversial because I'm saying then truth is relative then.
No, well, there's a thing called ontology and a thing called epistemology.
Yeah.
In ontology is things as they actually are, and epistemology is about your ability to know it. You may not have the ability to know it, but like there's things that are right out of our reach that are there and we don't know about. But the fact that they're there is a truth. The fact that we don't know is just our bad luck.
There's unknown unknowns, I know, but because nobody can prove there is a God, I believe, or a God. You can have circular arguments, but in the end, I believe that, and I'll try it, that an atheist has the same belief almost than somebody who believes in God. It's belief in the unknown. One's belief in the unknown is slightly different.
I would say if you can...
I think...
So, what I was really trying to say is I was asking what is... I was listening there and I was hearing truth was the part of the argument, and I'm thinking, I don't know what truth is in the way you're using it.
I think the way Tom and Kevin both explained it covers it very well, that it's what lines up with reality. That if you get a theist and an atheist, one says God exists, the other one says God doesn't exist.
But neither can prove that that's true.
Whether they can prove it's true or not, there is a truth in it.
One's wrong, the other's right.
One's wrong, one's right.
But that depends on the person. So therefore, to me,
I'm not saying which one is true, but I'm saying that there is truth there.
Ultimately, there may be, yes, but
there is a fact that one or the other of them has got right.
Yeah, correct. But I believe that we will never know as humans, we're never meant to know which is right or wrong.
But that's irrelevant.
So what if the atheists are right then?
Sorry?
Their version is true.
Well, then we're mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
But I think part of what Brian was saying was that in deciding matters of ethics, a lot of people are kind of pushing aside any sort of factual basis for it. And so they ignore the science.
Yep.
And say, I'm reconstructing values for this, and in a sense, I don't care what the science says.
Yep. Well, like that quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald, I don't care about what's true, I just want to be happy.
Yeah, but that's deliberately a cynical comment to get you to think. It wasn't necessarily, it's said in that sense.
Well, I don't know, they were pretty hedonistic days for if you...
No, if you read Fitzgerald, he was broken in many.
But even so, that appears to be the general way a lot of people are thinking these days. They wouldn't come right out and say it like that. They hadn't thought it through that carefully.
But out of context, that doesn't mean anything. I think if you read it in the context of that story, you'd find that it's actually a cynical view.
I'm suggesting that view...
It was tongue-in-cheek.
It may well have been, and I did consider that as a distinct possibility when I included it in. But there are a lot of people whose approach to life mirrors the face value of that statement these days.
Yeah.
And if you think about it logically, as I said, if this existence, I'm born, I live, I die, and that's all there is to it, is all there is, then what is most important is what's going to make me the happiest or the most comfortable during this period that I'm existing. And truth has to have secondary importance in that context.
And logic and reason also goes out the window too.
Maybe truth and logic and reason are what make you happy.
Well, if that's what makes you happy, then go for it.
If you're comfortable and not being oppressed, then that's good. We're comfortable and can make those arguments in history that hasn't always been the case.
That has never been the case.
Never. And but we are in our society very...
There is a saying, the truth will never hurt you, but that's a kind of an act of faith.
That's what
because some people may not believe that, but they may not want the truth because they want to be happy and they don't believe the truth will make them happy.
But you're saying the truth is whether you believe in God or not, and every other truth is beyond that.
I'm saying the truth is the things as they actually are. And so the Socratic principle is to go where the evidence leads and not take on a belief that you prefer.
Things as they actually are is an objective measure of how things actually are.
Yep.
And how can any one of us or any of us even collectively make an objective measure of how things actually are?
Well, that's the problem of epistemology.
Well,
Yeah.
Like you're not saying you can, eh?
Yeah. And,
I mean, we've developed certain approaches like scientific inquiry, which lots of people consider one of the best, if not the best method of investigating and trying to approximate reality,
Yep.
and all scientific knowledge is provisional. I mean, none of that.
It's not
If
perfect.
you're genuinely scientific about things, then it's all knowledge is provisional.
Yep.
Until it's disproven. So nothing. You can't say anything's correct. You can only say this is what all of our best investigation to this point has indicated to us through our subjective measurement and subjective interpretation. But none of that's necessarily absolute truth. We could realise 5 years down the track, or
we may not have absolute certainty.
So there's only ever provisional knowledge, and
Correct.
and that's it, isn't it? So there's no.
But it doesn't mean that there's a. It doesn't mean that there isn't an objective reality.
Sure.
But it's just a question of how certain I can come to know what that is.
Yep.
The example William Lane Craig uses, and I know you always lose, since the first person to mention the Nazis loses, but the way he basically said if the Nazis had won World War II and succeeded in eliminating and convincing everybody that it was right to kill the Jewish people off, then it would have still been objectively wrong. How would that have been? How would you argue that? That it would, because there's nobody on the planet, and obviously that's how we'd evolved to get to that point to have the herd mentality, and it would work for our social circles because then we wouldn't have had that argument. So there's nobody left that would actually stick up and say it's wrong. So can we still say that it was wrong?
Well, he's talking about objective reality.
Objective truth.
Objective truth, yeah.
Objective right and wrong, objective truth.
Yeah.
So would it have still been wrong? And on what basis?
Yeah, he's saying it is objectively wrong.
Correct, that's what I'm saying. Which I think
even though we may all deny it.
Right? And I think it's a really good illustration because there's nobody left on earth that disagrees, and yet we would still judge that hypothetical situation as wrong. How can we do that? On what basis?
But I think human history says that there'll always be somebody that objects.
No. But he's saying ontologically it is objectively wrong, and it doesn't matter if everybody in the world disagrees with it.
Is correct.
Yeah.
Or take the Nuremberg trials. Ravi Zacharias gives a great example that one of the judges at Nuremberg got so sick of the leaders of the Holocaust basically going and saying that we were obeying the laws of our land. Those laws were human inventions, right? And the judge piped up and said, but is there not a law above our laws? And I think that's the whole question. Is there not a law above our laws?
Correct. I mean,
there was an awful lot in the stuff that I looked up that covers all of these sorts of questions like that. It goes into great detail, but there's huge limit as to what could be incorporated to it.
But are they part of being the herd? Surviving as part of the herd, that was what was occurring. That was what I was wanting to ask. Since we've become civilised and formed cities, we've had to invent rules about living together so that we get on with one another.
Well, different societies, different cultures have developed different sorts of rules.
But not too dissimilar about getting on with your neighbour and stuff like that. Okay, there's always been a rule or a dictator that might be that he is the law and creates the law. But there's generally been rules about...
In the debate at the last meeting, I mentioned the power of the father in the Roman law. The father had the right, it was the legal right to execute capital punishment on the members of his family.
Yeah, but they didn't do it very often.
But, all right, but you're saying... sorry?
Happens in Sharia today.
Yeah, but it was. I think I felt that you were being a bit unfair on the Romans.
Why? Because it was a fact of law.
No, but they are the people that have given us the judge.
Yeah, what have the Romans ever done for us?
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, they've given us bureaucracy. That's their legacy, and they've given us the rule of law.
I'm not saying that everything the Romans did was wrong, but
where the rule of law
something that we
where the rule of
reject
civil
now.
law is separate from the law of the military law.
An example that
Where even the emperor had to obey the civil law.
An example that Vishal Mangalwadi uses in his book is that of sati, if that's how you pronounce it, the custom in India of burning the widow on her husband's funeral pyre.
Yeah, and it's no longer done.
It's no longer done. That was just part of their culture, was the right thing to do. The British stopped it. And he is very strongly in favour of the British doing that, as an Indian himself.
Of course.
So that was part of their culture, but their culture has been changed by external laws from outside. So can we now say that it was right when they were doing it because that was what their culture and society said? Or do we agree that it was wrong anyway?
It was wrong anyway, yeah. And it's like when we went to PG, and PG had quite the shrunken heads and all that stuff. Okay, so the people there said that it was good that was abolished because they were trapped in that. I mean, and they were trapped because it was a small society and it had become the norm.
So the implication of that is you're happy to enforce a custom or a rule on somebody because you think there's an objective right or wrong.
Yeah, I think there is objective. That's what I'm trying to say to you. I disagree with your version of truth about there's this truth that you might not know, but there's truth that you know.
Yeah.
Okay, because you imply that we will never know truly. There's the unknown that we'll never know, and you're calling that truth, but which we cannot discover. But there is discoverable truth.
Yes.
Well, 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
like boys don't menstruate.
Yeah, but there's also the truth, or whatever you want to call it, or morality, that we don't go doing that thing to women just because,
I'd just like to mark that up because that's one of the things in our current society is regarded as a sin in the atheist morality is to actually tell somebody else what's true for them.
But nobody's telling me what the atheist morality is. That's what I'm trying to figure out. There's an assumption of what that is there that I didn't. So I actually truly don't know what the atheist morality is.
Well, the ultimate thing is atheism itself. There is no morality. There can be no morality because of.
Well, is that a small fraction of atheists or total?
No,
it's like Donald Trump's Christianity representing what I believe
One of the things I said right at the beginning of my talk is that we need to differentiate between atheism and atheists. According to atheism, there can be no morality, but all atheists, everybody lives as if morality is, and we all have morality.
Yeah, and atheists would vary too.
Yeah, atheists would vary.
I don't know what you mean when you say atheism.
Atheism, yeah, you're just using that as a term to mean what?
Define atheism.
Yeah.
Well, again, from one of the articles that I read, the fundamental point of atheism says there is no God, and that's all there is to it.
That's just cherry picking quotes out of context that don't really, like you were saying.
No,
before,
we had Scott Sherrard here at our last talk, and that was one of the points that he made. That's what atheism is.
As well.
There is no God.
Correct.
It's a conclusion on a particular point about.
No, he claims that is the fundamental central.
Well, he doesn't necessarily speak definitively as to what atheism.
No, he doesn't, but he is the president or whatever of the Australian Atheist Society, whatever that situation was.
But all right,
how happened the next step was that I failed. No, sorry, you were saying the same thing, I think. So.
No, what could it be otherwise?
What is atheism?
Yeah.
Well, it's just a conclusion on a very narrow issue of whether there's any evidence or reasonable basis to believe in any particular God or any particular gods, and that's it. So it means without belief in a God or gods. It doesn't mean belief that there is none.
Well, isn't it an agnostic view? That's agnosticism.
Most atheists these days, when you try to be pinned on this comment, they will say, "I simply lack a belief." And Ricky Gervais has a great skit on this as well about he's a non-skier. He doesn't go skiing, so he doesn't know anything about skiing or like anything about skiing. So you don't attribute to him a whole lot of things about not skiing.
Well, what's the difference between an agnostic and an atheist?
Oh, an agnostic is someone. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
No, yeah, respect.
Agnostic is someone who doesn't claim to know.
Yeah.
So Gnostic is knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah.
So agnostic means without knowledge. So they acknowledge that they don't know.
Yeah.
So you can have agnostic theists. And
so they're not sure whether there is a God or not.
No. Agnostic is they don't claim to know.
Yeah.
So they're not sure.
You can be an agnostic theist who says, I believe in a god or gods, theist, which is about beliefs, and an agnostic meaning without, I don't claim to know.
But there's a hard agnostic as well, who claims that you can't.
Yeah, Huxley and others have used agnostic in different senses, and this is where all the language is slippery, and you've got to be very precise about how you define. So if you're going to talk about belief in a god or not, you've got to define a god very clearly. Are we talking about Yahweh, or are we talking about other gods?
That's another topic altogether. It's an important one, but a different one.
Yeah.
Well, we need to define what god or gods we're talking about, otherwise. And there might be different degrees of either belief or lack of belief, or even an ability to assert, not only do I not believe, but I'm quite sure that it's not reasonable to believe in any particular god or any particular
Will there be someone who come out and say, I believe that there is no God?
I believe there is no God is well, yeah. I mean,
they always say it this way. They always say it this way, to shoot the burden of proof. And I've actually come to believe this is not unreasonable, because this is truly the way their worldview. And I think there is a consistency here, but there's also a follow-on. So, and my workmates get particularly cross at this, where they say, I'm an atheist, I just lack a belief. Which means that you have to prove to me there is. I don't have any reason to substantiate.
Yeah, so dodging the burden of proof.
I get it, right? So that's not the way to also think about it. I think Brian is also quite correct, and I think Scott's probably quite correct, because in general, atheism is all being a negative. It's very hard to live your life as a negative, right? Maybe Malcolm, the Libs will get back in by not being Bill Shorten, but Bill Shorten's trying to get in by doing something, right? So it's hard to live your life with the negative. So most times, most atheists or hard agnostics, meaning those people who say we can't know, right, will also be materialist humanists. And that's the belief system more than atheism.
Yeah, well, there's a distinction between naturalism and atheism. Like I know people who are atheists but not naturalists.
Correct.
So they might they say, I don't believe in a God, but I believe in a spirit world.
That's increasingly common. That's right.
And but a naturalist will say there's no spirit world.
Correct.
He'd say the physical universe is all there is.
And I think that, Brian, your talk more is really about the scientific naturalist, the materialist, which normally flows, but not always, to your point.
Sorry, Kevin, you said when atheists do that, they're shifting the burden of proof, which is...
Or they're avoiding the burden of proof.
Okay, well, that's very different to shifting it, because that implies that
the
burden was on them to disprove your God.
Well, at the last talk...
And they're trying to shift that away from themselves.
Because, like Scott...
Well, it's not. That's quite different to say that they're shifting it rather than
not taking it on. But people asked him, have you read the Bible? He said, no. Have you read the New Testament? No. Have you read the Gospels? No. This is the president of the Australian Atheist Association. Now, why not? He said, well, unless you can prove it true, I'm not going to read it.
Well, I don't speak for Scott.
Well, neither
but you don't have to.
But basically, he's saying it's up to you to prove that this is the word of God before I bother to look.
Yeah, and that's a fair comment, because
it's not very scientific.
Should he read every book by every person who claims to
most people
that their God's true?
What I'm trying to say is, you've defined me as an agnostic. I'm a Christian, and I'm probably a more liberal Christian, what we define in that sense. But I know that I can't prove one way or the other. Okay, so it's actually a personal belief of why I'm a Christian, which is an emotional thing rather than a scientific thing. So I believe in Christ, and that because so many people suddenly rose and suddenly went out to the rest of the world and converted everybody, or a lot of people.
Yeah, it's more of a hunch from seeing the whole picture.
Yeah, so it's that thing, and also knowing your own life and how you feel and that stuff. And because I've tried to, I know this is a reasonable faith, but I cannot those arguments, I think, don't convince me one way or the other. So I end up coming back to being an agnostic, in the sense that I'm saying an atheist, in my mind, is no different than somebody that's a theist, because they believe in the unknowable. You just defined it, the unknown. They believe the unknown is slightly different than your unknown.
But a secular materialist or an atheist materialist, that's different, because that has a positive worldview.
Yeah.
Or a humanist.
Well, a humanist. The speaker last week was a humanist, I think, as well. He professed to be a humanist. Because he was
all the above,
yeah.
And everything that Brian said would be answering secular humanism, which is generally associated with an atheist.
Just that was one of the things I said briefly, is that secular humanism is built on top of atheism.
So
as a foundation.
There's nothing wrong with the beliefs of humanism, in the sense that it's reasonably morally sound. From what you've described as...
Except there's no basis for it.
What would you point to?
So
Brian's just pointed out there's no basis for it.
But the basis... So this is what I haven't got...
No basis.
The reason that he...
That's a conclusion, not a...
doesn't accept the Bible because of all the wrong things that Christians and other religions have done. Christians as well as Hindus or whatever else. So he's going on history and all the hypocrisy that's gone on. And so he doesn't actually understand the core beliefs of Christ. Because if I took the Old Testament, I'd be stoning women and all sorts of things still. I'd be doing Sharia law. Virtually.
Not quite, but yeah.
Yeah, we would be. So we've chosen to throw out some bits of that.
You're assuming there's no such thing as moral discovery.
Exactly. Well, I'm not assuming that. I've said we've discovered that as we've gotten along, and we've deliberately thrown out that bit of the Old Testament as not being God's law.
It out, but that's
well, we've ignored it, or whatever we've done, we've chosen to ignore it. If the literal thing of every word is right, but not the gist of what Christ said is there's only two rules, love your neighbour.
He said that sums up.
Yeah, sums it up. And even the Jewish leader, when they rewrote, when they took it, they said the same thing, and his comment was the rest of the book is commentary. Okay, they're the only truths. Oh, okay.
Jesus didn't say that bit, but
oh no,
a Jewish.
Who knows what he implied? It's actually
a rabbi said that one.
Yeah, a rabbi said what I just said. Okay.
But I think that there's a possibility that some things could have been right then, but wrong now.
Yes, and that's a good point.
For instance, there was no international police or United Nations or police force. So if you actually conquered, you're in war with another nation and you caught prisoners, what do you do with them?
There was certain rules of law in those days that they've even got that if a town resisted, they could be looted for 3 days afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay. And then whatever happened, and then went away. So there were even those times there were certain rules, that were developed.
Yeah, but the rules are different.
And there's always people that broke them.
But they didn't have prisoner of war camps, did they? So what did they do? They let them go?
They put them to the sword, they let them go.
Or they made slaves of them and sold them.
Or slave them, one or the other. You finished up as a slave.
So, all right, so one of the options, or a common option, was just to kill them, wasn't it?
Yes.
So they didn't cause you any future harm.
The men and the women.
The other option was to make them slaves.
Yes.
So you say, slavery is wrong. But which would you rather be? Sorry?
Well, the other option
that's a good point.
Go. I've just read in the Old Testament the story where they conquered an army. They were told by God to feed them and let them go back.
Yeah, it is. I guess it's an option, but I'd say it wouldn't have been commonly practiced. Because if you let them go, they then become a problem for you later. Well, that's the way they would have thought.
Potentially.
Yes, correct.
So I'd say that the common reaction would be either to kill them or to make them slaves.
But there's a certain... I'm only thinking of... the people must have been similar to us, and if you were sent in just to kill all the kids and stuff like that, you would actually get
Yes.
How you could keep doing that, I don't
No.
know.
So
Even in
Are you,
those
are you arguing for moral relativism then? You're saying slavery is not as bad as killing? Enslaving someone's not as bad as
In that
killing?
context,
Yeah.
in that context, then yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
So there might be some overarching principles that are unchangeable, but maybe the way in which it's put into practice could be different in different situations.
yeah, Roman. I mean, there's the Vita Pompeii, and they quote when you go there that 3/4 of the population were descended from slaves.
Yeah.
So even though they became slaves, they then had a way of working. Your master, you had to actually give the slave his freedom after a certain time, if he'd earned it, or they'd earned it, and then they became the traders, and so it wasn't as bad as we think in terms of that slavery, as you say. It wasn't as bad as maybe a slave in some other circumstances.
Which is why you can't really have hard and fast rules, because it depends on what kind of slavery you're talking about.
Yeah,
You're talking about. I mean, they talk about.
Because
of a fate worse than death. There's certain types of slavery where you'd be.
that's right. So they were civilised about the whole exercise within when they lived together. So that's
Like
so
some of the
that's
slaves
not
are
bad.
like members of the family.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, but don't confuse absolute morality with objective morality. Like, it's an absolute morality would be saying it's always wrong to lie.
Yeah.
But yet we know that, those, again, go back to the Holocaust just because it's graphic,
That's right.
right? We know that many people lied to save Jewish people and actually get them out of the country or whatever. That wasn't wrong. So don't confuse moral absolutes with the existence of objective morality. Because
Yes, you're right. Yeah, that's a good. That's what these arguments I have trouble with, because of those grey areas you just alluded to.
Yeah, because Brian Schroeder was a lecturer here in philosophy. Unfortunately, he's died, but he said it's really hard to actually think of an absolute moral principle.
I think love your neighbour as yourself.
Sorry?
I think love the Lord your God and love your neighbour as yourself.
Yeah, well, what he came up with was to treat others with respect.
Which is the same thing.
Yeah, well, that was he could think of as an overarching moral principle.
And I think of C.S. Lewis writing in wartime when he says we're called to love the German people, but that does not mean that we're not called to oppose them. I think that's a really, really good point there as well. So what does that mean? That might mean that you don't drop the atomic bomb on Berlin, but it might mean that you go and invade their beaches and actually clear out the camps and kill a lot of them. But again, there's a difference between objective and absolute and how you apply it.
Yeah, because if firebombing a German city like they did, morally right or not, cities,
Talk about Dresden, and that's it. I mean, they talk about Dresden a lot.
I think it's safe to assume.
Obviously there was a lot.
I think it's safe to assume that some of the things done by our side were wrong.
Absolutely, but what I'm saying is that Lewis was writing in wartime, right? Lewis was writing after serving in World War One and seeing the brutality there, studying under an atheist professor who formed his moral intuition and helped bring him to faith, actually. And he said that we should be loving the I think this is in Mere Christianity. Don't quote me on that bit. That's the bit I'm least sure about. It could be in.
I don't recall it from there.
It could be in Psalms. But we're called to love the German people, but we're not called to not oppose them.
And that's the pacifist versus the whether you're going to defend your rights. So
No, it's not pacifist at all, really, is it?
No. Pacifism is different than that. That's what I'm trying to say. Pacifism is I know people who are pacifists or have been, or changed their view, who said they would do nothing if the Japanese had invaded Australia. And I said no, I would have fought. But my father, who fought, as a commando and did fight and saw some awful things, I think, he was a pacifist after the war, definitely. Yeah. In a sense, he would still go and fight, but he didn't believe in war.
You're not doing it because you hate them, you're doing it because
you're opposing the ends that
Japanese at all.
I'm just suggesting.
At all, because the kamikaze attacks, where you just mowed them down, sounded pretty awful.
I mean, the tragedy of war is that most people on both sides are ordinary people that
Yeah, so there's that famous
Do
story
right
about
things.
the Christmas,
Well,
the Christmas
yeah.
on
And there's
the Western Front,
Yeah.
where they had to actually execute British soldiers because they wouldn't fight afterwards.
But
They'd
the
have to
point is
execute them.
To make them go and fight.
my simple point from Lewis was just that an objective truth to love your neighbour is not negated by the fact that sometimes you actually have to oppose it.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's